Hello and welcome to this France 24 interview in this very prestigious setting of the UN Security Council. It's the first visit by the French Foreign Affairs Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault to the United Nations. Thank you for joining us for this interview. Now, you're here because France is currently chairing the UN Security Council. It's a rotating presidency of a month, and you've come to chair a session on peacekeeping operation and civil protection. It's a key issue for the United Nations, central to the work of the UN Security Council, so we'll be discussing certain aspects of peacekeeping operations. Let me begin with Mali, which is a peacekeeping operation which concerns the UN considerably and diplomats concerned with this matter. There's talk of an increase in the number of troops on the ground, whereas the results of the peacekeeping operation is rather mixed, shall we say, with many attacks against peacekeepers, with casualties. Is it really the situation to escalate to add more troops on the ground?
This is crucial because peace is the final objective, and peace is still not an entire given. There are a lot of things to be done in the country. This is a poor country. It is also a state of law. And that state of law needs to be complied with, and the elected government needs to be conducting its mission throughout Mali. So this is far from being the case today. Some agreements were signed, and they need to be implemented. And peacekeeping operations have the mission of securing and protecting the population. And we also got a French operation under the UN mandate called the Barkhane operation. And the mission is different here. It's about battling terrorist attacks threatening Mali. So the entire region is still vulnerable and it needs to be supported. And peacekeeping operations are aiming at this, and we're now reaching the end of this. It needs to be renewed and consolidated. This is something which we expect in the region, and this is in the interest of the international community.
Now, the Barkhane operation, the French operation that you've mentioned, you're going to increase the number of troops?
This is not necessary. I believe that it is now well grounded in the region. It is present in Niger, Chad, and is also battling Akim and the Islamic organization in Mali with terrorist attacks affecting the Malians, and it is also present in other places in the region so as to battle Boko Haram, which is another threat touching Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and all of the neighboring countries. So all those countries need to be secured so as to ensure their future development, because those countries need to be developed, and populations should have hopes other than just fleeing and migrating. Then, in that case, supporting proposals need to be made with development programs. And at the same time, we also need to secure those populations. Those two go or should be conducted in parallel. When French President François Hollande decided to roll out the French military operation in Mali in January 2013, I was Prime Minister at the time, and I was present at the Defense Council, and this was a question of hours. If we had not jumped in, Mali would now be under jihadist control, and the entire region would be under control of the jihadists.
Well, we see in Mali, as in many of these peacekeeping operations, a degree of ambivalence on the part of national authorities in respect of UN peacekeepers, with sometimes a desire to instrumentalize the UN in domestic infighting for separatist claims in the case of Mali. Now, ultimately, don't you think that the UN presence is disrupting the normal national interplay and making conflicts last? We see one of the problems of peacekeeping ops in Africa, with the exception of Côte d'Ivoire. We can't stop them.
We need an international organization and coalition so as to battle terrorism using intelligence and military means when necessary. And you also realize that when countries solve the problem, they need to be supported. And this requires a temporary UN presence thanks to peacekeeping operations. And this is going to help the country go back on its tracks.
In Central African Republic, another peacekeeping operation where there we can argue that things have calmed considerably thanks to the UN presence, but what we see internationally is not that. It's the sexual assaults, the violence by UN troops. Don't you think that the reputation of UN troops, and notably French troops, is not irretrievably tarnished by what's happening? How can we ensure that the people can forgive this?
Of course, a presence on the ground, whether UN or national forces and French troops, need to be exemplary. Nothing should be accepted and tolerated. In no case shall we condone this.
Is the UN doing enough? A whistleblower came out recently saying that not enough was being done and resigned.
Yes, one must always do better. There shall be no doubts, but we have 128,000 people from different countries deployed in those 16 peacekeeping operations. This is a great number, but most of those people behave well. We have very stringent rules, and specific training is being provided, and some cases were communicated. Wrongdoings in Central Africa occurred. Now, justice jumps in with investigations being conducted, and very stringent punitive measures are imposed. Now, when it comes to peacekeepers responsible for wrongdoings, then the French command took the relevant measures right away. And now that you're talking about the Republic of Central Africa, two organized groups were fighting against one another, and this was going to be generating a civil war. And at that time, France decided to jump in with the agreement of the United Nations. This was a very risky operation, but France assumed its responsibility with the Sangaris operation. Now it came to an end, and Central Africa jumped in, and presidential and legislative elections were organized. President Touadéra will attend the Security Council. This was an operation with the presence of a peacekeeping process, enabling the country to get back on its tracks on the basis of law and transparency. Now, this generates hope and confidence. And this stems from France's role that was able to jump in, and the United Nations as well.
Turning now to Europe and the Brexit topic, which everyone is talking about. You said this week that it would be a very bad thing if the Leave camp were to win in the UK. Is it as certain as that? What was negotiated in February by the Europeans, the concessions made to the UK? We see very negative public opinion throughout Europe on the EU. Isn't Europe so weakened that a Brexit would be an opportunity for a new beginning?
The Brexit would generate a seismic situation in Europe. Europe would be destabilized, although we would still overcome the situation. But it would still also generate a seismic effect for the UK. Now, we're really into the unknown if they decided to do so, but I'm confident. A referendum is always very hard, contentious, and brutal. And in the end, the British might actually think about their historical interest and might decide to remain in Europe. Now, be that as it may, you're talking about a Europe that is not carrying as much dream as it used to be in the past, and that is going to force us, European leaders, to really react to this expectations from people. We need to really rekindle the European project, not just through technical means, but political means.
Among topics that people in Europe consider have been mishandled, there's the issue of the migrants crisis. Recently, Turkey threatened to no longer cooperate if the visa issue, tourist visas for Turks, wasn't resolved. The EU, for the time being, has postponed the matter. Are we going to achieve a solution? And what happens if the Turks execute their threat?
We see a clear relationship with the situation in Syria, where we're talking about war casualties, 400,000 deaths in that country. This is terrible. But the war goes on with more refugees, 3 million refugees in Turkey, for example, and refugees all over the place. So we need to provide answers. So we keep plugging away at the peace process in Syria, but we need to really acknowledge the dramatic situation of those millions of refugees. An agreement was signed between the EU and Turkey, and this has to be maintained because it is quite paramount. This is not a painless process because the visa issue you were mentioning, which Turkey is now asking for, now this has to be done on a legal basis and EU criteria, and this will have to be done in the interest of each and everyone. But this is a painful process, and in the face of crisis, although Europe might be criticized for being too slow, the EU decides and acts, and this is what we're doing today, and this is what needs to be done.
Briefly, because we're coming to the end of the interview, Syria, as you mentioned, the truce is now dead in the water. We saw a meeting between Syrian, Iranian and Russian defense ministers where there's 100% support for the Syrian leadership. Isn't that rather discouraging? Isn't it once again Putin who's pulling all the strings and you, that's to say the West, are mere spectators of what Putin's doing?
Putin, Russia have the means to weigh on Damascus, which keeps bombing and dropping barrels of dynamite on cities, and Aleppo most especially. And who are the victims? Civilians are the victims. And while this is taking place, political discussions cannot resume. The moderate opposition cannot return. So the major challenges in the forthcoming days and weeks is allow human aid to have access to these affected populations. And Moscow has the means to do so. Iran also has the means. They need to weigh on Damascus. Now, the UN is ready to send human aid through airdrops, but this is very difficult. And we really need, as a result, we need to really have access to those places and work on a ceasefire. And this can only be done through talks with Russians, Americans, and others, because the objective is to resume political discussions. No other solutions exist.
But we're a long way from that today.
Yeah, we're far away from this because the ceasefire was interrupted. But the Russians' interest, let's talk about their interest. Having war go on and on and on for years on end with permanent chaos, with no winners, the civil populations will be totally destroyed. And then refugees will be all over the place with domestic destabilization, including in Russia. At some point, reason should prevail. I will unflaggingly say and repeat to all the partners, including the Russians, this is the interest of the international community to reach a peace. Not anyway, because we're talking about political transition. So we're not going to do like in Iraq. Now, at the end of the war was followed by chaos. We need to set up a state with unity and stability and enabling minorities to live in peace and producing stability in the region, because without stability, then we'll end up with a situation such as Libya and Iraq. And I think we can actually share this objective with the Russians.
Just briefly, a word about another country experiencing chaos, Libya. This week there was a meeting. Mrs. Mogherini came to plead for an extension of the Sophia operation to increase the embargo on weapons in Libya. Will the international community once again be sucked into Libya on the ground?
Not on the ground. No, this is not the objective. You're mentioning a mandate which could be extended in the searching for a ship carrying weapons provided to the Islamic State group in North Libya. This control procedure is being carried out in the central Mediterranean zone in international waters, and this is crucial so as to really eliminate this Islamic State group capacity. Now, the international community can allow for this. Now, what really counts, Mr. Sarraj's government of national unity in Libya should really be fully involved, and they should go further. The president, should lead a national army so as to battle the Islamic State group and secure the Libyan population. And we should really draw lessons from the past. Let's not remake 2011. This is at least not part of France's political program.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much. Thanks for granting us this interview here in this UN Security Council room. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for more news on France 24.